Steven is here. Hi, Steven.
Hey.
I'm so happy you're a PH. I am too.
Oh, yeah. It'll be night finally.
Yes. And Elizabeth Spear, who is a fellow film director, writer, producer, she and I co-directed something a few years ago, which is now on, is it on Amazon Prime?
I don't know what it's on right now.
I don't even, it's out.
It cycles through, yeah.
Yeah, it's out. It's in the world places. Called Helltown, which is a fake TV show, as if it was serialized horror film. So it's a soap opera horror film. Anyway, she and I are working on a script for a producer for a project, and we were just talking early before everybody else came in, and I thought, why don't we just keep going? So we're talking briefly about the sort of, we're at the beginning. So and there's sort of a story within the story. So Elizabeth and I were talking about, she's going to do the structure and the plot line and the beats for what is the story within our story. And once she's done with that, then I'm going to come in and do the beats for the movie that we're creating of the making of this story. It's complicated, and typically when one does a movie, they have just that story. And because I don't like to make anything too easy, have decided to make yet a movie within the movie.
Right, of course. How simple.
Right. So, why make one movie when you can make two at the same time? Anyway, and so we were talking about, like, how does one organize that? When you're co-writing with somebody, how do you really make it so that it's not so confusing for everybody? Mm-hmm. And essentially what we do, which I'll read from my book in a minute, is the skeleton, the structure, the beat sheet, whatever that is. And I have just learned that I should be talking like this so that everybody feels like I'm talking to them. And I just haven't done this for 6 months. This is like, and I thought maybe to.
Looking at, Steve, when you
well,
look
I like
at the corner of your screen, what are you looking at?
Right now, I'm looking at the squares. So yeah. I'm looking at you, Elizabeth. Now I'm looking at Steven. Now I'm looking at Doug, and now I'm looking at myself.
Okay.
This is when I'm looking at the camera.
But this is looking at camera, right?
This is looking at the camera.
Right.
Which I haven't done because there's no face to look
exactly.
at. It's just this black area. So I feel like I'm talking to you even though I'm looking in the kitchen. So what is, I think, important to do for those of you who are at various stages of starting out, or professionals or whatever. I mean, Stephen and the others, Aaron and Jessa, if you want to participate, you can. Otherwise, you can just witness and watch. But if you want to tell me, like, where are you in your evolution as a filmmaker or writer, or what are you hoping to get out of the talk today?
I'll go, I guess. I'm an actor and a writer. Have professionally worked more as an actor, but writing is something I always enjoy, and I have a writing partner who I work with as well. But like, I don't claim to have like sold anything or anything in that regard. So for this, I was just interested in seeing what other people's process and their career process is like as well. Just sort of like connect with people. That's the only reason I'm here.
Great. Well, you'll get out of it something, I'm sure. Welcome. Yeah. And I would say, do you know Sylvester Stallone's story?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is essentially like, you write the material to showcase your ability, and then you just go make that as an actor. Or, it's like I see all these people that are friends or associates, or, well, let's take Doug, for instance. Doug is a fantastic actor. I've directed him in a movie for Mark Cuban's network. And you can, every time I hear somebody say, oh God, I'm tired of these auditions, or I just can't, I'm like, why don't you just write your own vehicle and do it? And even if you don't know how to direct, or you don't want to, you go and find somebody to do that for you. You know, or you work with, let's say you have an idea about a character that you really want to play, but maybe you're not even a very good writer. Well, then yeah, work with someone else who is a good writer, or say, hey, I have this character that I would really love to play, and I think I could nail it, and I haven't ever quite seen it before. Then you go and you develop that project to star yourself, and then you put your team together. You know, if you don't want to produce it, you go find a producer. If you don't know how to operate the camera, then you get a cinematographer or someone who does, you know, and you make it, and then you've got your platform. I mean, one of my projects that was made in, okay, I don't remember what year it was. It was filmed in Hong Kong and LA. And it was an actor who was just out of drama school in England and needed a show reel. And we crafted a story to suit this person, this performer, and ticking all the boxes of all the things that this person could do and do well. So we did that, and we crafted it. We made this movie, and there it is, you know. And then it's like it becomes a tangible thing that you can not just show people, but that, you know, when you walk into the next audition and you say, "Oh yeah, I was in this movie that just came out," that is it puts you in a different place than if you didn't have that movie, and if you just had like a reel. And sometimes I know that actors have done this, and we're getting a little off topic today, but a lot of the other actors that I know who have done this sometimes put in their show reel clips from things that never did exist, that were, you know, nowadays you can sort of like light and film a scene from a movie that isolated is a good clip for your reel, but actually that movie doesn't exist. You know, but the person watching it doesn't know that, because there are so many indie movies. You know, how would I possibly know that this movie didn't exist? Because I wouldn't have seen it anyway. You know, so it's like oftentimes you can get away with doing stuff like that, and as long as it looks, you know, the tonality of the little excerpt looks right, then you'll fool anybody to know, like, God, he's been in 17 movies. Even if, you know, that isn't the case. So I just want to say hi to Stephanie. Okay, I'm going to read a minute. What Elizabeth and I were talking about is to have your beat sheet and your structure, because once you have that done, you really can skip around. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like, oh, you know, scene 4 is really, really clear to me right now. So I can go and write that. I'm just going to read this, and then we'll talk about it. The chapter in the book is called The Floor Plan. And this is Filmmaking Confidential, which is my book that's out now, on Audible and paperback. Say you're building a house. Would you go to the lumber yard to buy wood before drafting a floor plan? No, that would be stupid. Now, say you want to write a screenplay. The same kind of thinking applies here too. Screenwriters who write with no idea where they're going usually end up with a script that reads like it doesn't know where it's going. I know several writers who sit down at their desks and stare at the blank screen, or sometimes actual paper, dig deep for the inspiration and begin typing away. It sounds romantic, maybe even the epitome of what it might mean to be a true writer. Well, I hate to burst the bubble, but unless you write in front of a group, no one else will see that moment except you. Sure, that romantic way of writing can sometimes make magic, but most of the time, many writers rarely make it to page 3 before starting over. And those who make it past page 3 usually take months and months to complete a single screenplay. Why? Because they didn't have a structure to follow. Having a floor plan or a clear outline is a more effective or efficient way to write a movie. There is no right way or wrong way to make this structure, outline, or floor plan. A structure can be organized in any way so long as it helps you. Note cards, computer document, etc. I use a single sheet of notebook paper to begin outlining mine in blue ballpoint pen. There are roughly 25 lines on a single sheet. First, number them 1 to 25. Then look at those numbers and imagine a time associated with them. I say it's somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. Then you can begin to separate the outline into movie time. Your single sheet of paper now represents somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes. Of course, you can break it down even further and use 2 sheets. I like keeping my entire outline on 1 sheet, making it easier to spot certain moments. And basically what I'm saying is, you know, in a lot of these books that exist about screenwriting as it is now, tend to have this sort of structure and this, the beats, and that becomes important, but it's movie time is more important, I think, to me. The old days of, you know, the exciting thing needs to happen on page 14 doesn't really apply anymore, because if you haven't hooked the audience, if you haven't hooked the audience within that first 5 minutes, then they're not going to be there 15 minutes later. You know, so what I like to do is a little bit like what I said in the book is I'll take a sheet of paper and I'll go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, down to 120. And I look at that as sort of 5-minute increments separated. And when you start thinking about what you're going to put in that 5-minute block, it fills up really quickly. So, you know, if you think about just sort of an opening scene, short, sweet, and then you're already at the credits at 3.5 or 4 minutes. By the time the credits are over, you're well into the 6th minute of your movie. So when you start thinking about, you know, act 1 up until page, I'll make it easy and just say 30. And then, you know, act 2, part 1 of act 2 from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. And then, you know, the second half of act 2 from 60 to 90 minutes. And then the act 3 and denouement from 90 to 120. I mean, you can make an 1.5-hour movie, you can make an 1 hour and 45, you can make an 1 hour and 20-minute movie, whatever that is fine. But if you just think about it, breaking it up into those 4 sections, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, having act 2 in the middle, 2 of those parts. You can sort of also input the hero's journey, or, you know, any other sort of like beat from, you know, like the Save the Cat books or anything like that, on top of that, to help you figure out how to draft the sort of outline. And one of the other things that I, well, I'll just read a little bit more and then I'll talk about it, because I talk about it in here. One way to learn about a screenplay's structure is by drafting one for an existing movie. Any movie will do. I'd suggest watching All About Eve and write down a brief description of what happens every 3 or 5 minutes. Then watch Showgirls and do the same. When you've finished, compare them. You'll discover they are basically the same movie. It's pretty obvious Joe Esterhazy studied the structure of All About Eve before writing Showgirls. And when you're going to do something like that, I would just say, you know, be really non-specific when you're making out your beats. So it's, you know, protagonist girl, fight scene with villain girl, you know, like you be sort of non-specific, because then when you compare existing movies, they are the same words. But if you start putting in their names and like more details and specifics, then that's when they'll be different. But that's also your clue and to make how to make yours unique. Before I before writing my first film, Pep Squad, I studied the structure of 9 to 5, the classic starring Dolly Parton, Lily Tomlin, and Jane Fonda. Instead of setting the story in the corporate world, I placed it in high school and added some of my own special touches, such as drive-by shootings, campy dialogue, and fun costumes. If you study Pep Squad and 9 to 5, you'll easily find the similarities in their structure. If you have a structure, floor plan, or outline, you can write freely in any order you like. That's my favorite part about getting the structure down first. If there's a specific scene or sequence that's really clear to me, I'll type that out first, even if it's in the middle of the timeline. Or maybe the ending is super clear. Go write it. Details and ways to combine sequences can be decided later. By drafting a solid floor plan, you'll have a lot of fun building your screenplay, and chances are you'll never have a feeling of burnout. You'll never have writer's block, and in the end, you'll actually have a comprehensive screenplay. That is leading into what I was going to talk about, which is one secret and one way to avoid writer's block is to just go to the next one, the next scene. You know, when I'm doing a draft 1, no one is going to see that ever. Because by the time I've shown it to my co-writer, we're already probably on draft 2. And then even then, you know, you go back and forth a few times before you ever show somebody else. And I think that, I mean, Elizabeth, have you ever had this problem where you start, you know, draft 1 and you're so into it that you just want to have it perfect, knowing that as soon as you finish draft 1, you yourself will already have a bunch of notes that you want to change.
Yeah, I think what I've learned recently is that it's a relief to stop writing. You just like put it all down, and then it's the best feeling ever to have somebody that's in your corner, or like, you know, someone that you trust, someone, you're a co-writer, co-director, whatever. And you're just like, okay, these are my ideas, your turn. And then that person infuses like new energy and new ideas and corrections. And then you just like go back and forth.
Well, and you know, when we co-wrote Helltown together, and we co-wrote it with a couple of other people also, what we did, because we had our outline and the structure, the floor plan all set up at the beginning, and we were on the same page, like the tonality and all that stuff. We had done a lot of preliminary talks about it, and we would sort of just divvy it up. We'd be like, hey, I'll go write these 3 scenes while you're working on those 3 scenes. You know, and then when we were finished with that, we just did 3 different ones. You know, I'm like, okay, I'll do these next 3 and you do these next 3. And then finally, when we had all of them combined, then that was sort of our sort of version 1.
Yeah. And I think that that's because our planning was so thorough, and we had an absolute, like, we knew exactly who all the characters were. We knew what needed to happen. I think the people that we, aside from you and me, we were more on like the character development team, and then there were some other people that like chimed in for kills, like good murder scenes. So they didn't have to like develop the psychology of the characters. So I think that's why that worked. And yeah, but I think that, I mean, we went over, we just knew who the characters were at all times. And so, yeah, that's why that worked, I think.
Yes, Doug.
Did you at any time while you were doing this start working with that first draft, or did you wait till you got the first draft done before then you went back and started looking at it and saying, okay, what about this? Especially since you guys had the characters down and you understood that psychology, as opposed to someone saying, well, now I think this person's going to become a basketball player or what, something absurd. And you go, well, wait, that's nowhere in their makeup. Did you hash any of that out, or did you just write the whole thing and then say, okay, let's go back and do it on the second pass and look at it?
I always suggest just get through it and go back on the second pass. And because sometimes, and let's say, you know, you've got your outline and the first major hooking dramatic point that you know has to happen at this point in the timeline, but you have no idea what it is, right? But you know everything else in the movie. So just write down the outline for everything else, flash out everything. Maybe at the end of your first version 1 draft 1, you might have 3 to 5 totally blank scenes.
Right.
And that's okay, because the point is to just get through to the end efficiently. Then you can go back. And once you have the bookends, and maybe you don't even have those, maybe you have the whole movie, but you don't know how it's going to start or how it's going to end. But once you have the whole other stuff already fleshed out and put down, it frees up space up here, which often, most of the time, once it's away from your brain and it's on the paper, suddenly you've got room to imagine new things.
Yeah, that's great, because I ran into a situation years ago working with someone, and we would be on a flow as writers, and he would stop and everything would freeze to decide whether the word should be the or the. And it's like, and then we would lose that flow, and it was very frustrating, as opposed to just getting down what we had and then going back and fine tuning. But he was obsessed about little minutia that just stopped it cold. It was very frustrating to be in a situation where you're going, we got an idea, things are going, we're playing off of each other, the dialogue's coming, then all of a sudden it stops for one word. And I never understood that mentality of like, let's just get through it, which is what was great about the book, saying just get it down and you can always go back and fine tune it. If you get stuck, move forward. And I thought that was very encouraging to hear, because it made sense in terms of, yes, if you've got a scene and you go, well, I know this is the important point, I just don't know how it's going to fit in, I'll move forward and come back.
Yeah, and maybe exactly. And the other thing I like to do, let's say if there's a monologue and you know that you want to write this beautiful monologue, but it's just not coming to you at the moment, or even if it's just a line of dialogue and they're going back and forth, I will put down in parentheses in the space for the dialogue, dramatic monologue here.
That's great. I like that.
Or she says something very witty, or his response, he is not very happy with her. And then I'll figure out the exact words later on. Again, the whole point is just to get the thing down and then go back to it. There are a couple of other screenwriting things I wanted to read before I talk more about, well, here's this little bit. It's about the same topic. The first draft of a screenplay isn't the draft that gets filmed. It also isn't the version shown to the actors. It's the beginning of a long line of drafts and versions, so there's no reason why it should take you very long to do it. I commissioned a screenwriter once for a film I wanted to make. She really struggled to complete the first draft. Weeks went by and she still wasn't finished. She said she really wanted it to be perfect before showing me. Yet I knew the moment she turned it in, I would have a laundry list of notes and changes. But she just kept insisting, just another week. After I received the first draft and started to work on my own version 2.0, she started to realize what I had meant earlier. No one but she and I saw the first draft, and nobody needs to. It won't be published, lined with gold, or shown in a museum. It's just step 1. Think of it as an instruction manual. When you're assembling a desk for Makia, do you usually fret about step 4 until you get there? No, of course not. So treat screenwriting the same way, one step at a time. If you've created a good solid floor plan, writing the first draft should be effortless. When you reach a scene that doesn't seem to be working, simply skip ahead to the next. You can always go back to the tricky scene in future drafts. And really, you could go back to that scene 4 drafts from now. You know, you could really just go back and forth until the day before shooting before you ever figure it out. So it's, I think, part of the psychology of wanting to have it done and the anxiety of having it done that keeps you from actually solving it when you don't know how to do it. And again, I'm wondering if I say this in this chapter that I was about to read or not, but one of the things that is true is it's pretty, oh, I wish I could just find it, because now that it's come up, I'm excited about it. Screenplays aren't meant to be read. It sounds weird, but that is not their purpose. The purpose of a screenplay is a map for your storyline. And so the actors know where to stand and sit and what they say. And it's to keep on, sort of a document of the storyline. But screenplays, their purpose, they're meant to be heard and watched. So the focus on reading a screenplay is a waste of time. I mean, there's a thing in here where I compare a section of Woody Allen's Annie Hall, which you have to see on paper to really understand. So here's like all the words that he uses, in his description. And in my take on the same, it's this. Lots of white on the page, which is one of the things that often I've heard, people say. I mean, typically directors mostly appreciate space on the paper. It's not prose. It's not going to be published. It's going to maybe be copied at the most if you wanted to waste paper. Most people now just keep it on their phone, or they have like a PDF on their tablet on set. But if you get out of the idea that screenplays are meant to be read, and really they're just there as a guide, so that they're meant to be heard and watched, then it's almost like it gives you a little bit of freedom to not worry so much about the words that you're using on the paper. Now, if you were going to use the screenplay as a means to get funding, and the potential investor puts a huge impact in their decision-making on the quality of the writing of your screenplay, now then there is a purpose for this screenplay. But that meets the objective that has nothing to do with watching it or listening to it. Typically though, unless it's a studio or a production company coming up with the money, out of all the investors that I've ever worked with, none of them have asked to read the screenplay. And in my second book, which is part of the class that I teach on a regular basis about how to find investors and the 5 types of investors, and once we identify each personality type in each group, none of them are interested in reading a screenplay. The only people that are the people who are in the industry, who think that there's this value placed on the reading of a screenplay that makes or breaks a movie, even if everybody knows it's not true. I mean, haven't we all read some really stupid screenplay and it became an incredible movie? Or likewise, you could read a fantastic screenplay. It's poetic. I mean, it could win the Pulitzer, right? And then you go and it's like the worst movie you've ever seen. So it's all about how to take the aesthetic know-how and the team that's putting it together, of the actors and the camera crew and the art department that make it great. I had a friend who won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress a few years ago, and she is one of the greatest actors on the planet, who was doing a TV show at Netflix, and she said the script was so terrible, it was inactable. Like the line was so mundane that she couldn't even figure it out, like how to wrap her mind around like how to say this really dumb thing. But because she's so good, you know, the saying of like, you know, I would watch that person read the phone book, or I would watch that person just read the weather report, because it's the good ones are so good and captivating with other stuff going on that really it doesn't matter what words are coming out of your mouth. So in that case, it's like some of the great ones really can take really crappy material and make it fascinating, which is helpful when your screenplay is just so-so. But if it's, you know, but if it's better, even better. The other thing I was going to mention, which I had forgotten all about, and I didn't really, I wish I would have put it in this book because I learned about it in school and I didn't put it in, but I remembered it the other day. And it's too late because it's published and it's out. Hitchcock was who I studied most when I was at CalArts all those years ago. And he, for a few of his films, did the storyboards from beginning to end for the entire film before writing words to any of it. So what he would do is he would plan sort of the visual shots. Like if truly any great film, if you watch it on mute, you know exactly what's going on, right? So first, if you've got that visual part down, the visual part of your story, then the words are secondary. And when it comes to writing a script, it's like most screenwriters and filmmakers approach it almost backwards. You know, if they're going to make a movie, they should start with the visuals. If they're going to write a book, maybe they should start with the words. If your movie is about like a rhythm, you know, maybe there is something important about them at the same time. But what I would think it'd be interesting if, I would love to do a movie where I have storyboarded it entirely before writing a word. I think that would be a really fun challenge. Anybody else think that'd be fun?
Yeah.
All right. You can be in that one.
Because the visuals are just so amazing sometimes, and you're going, wait, I don't know what they said, but wow, that was incredible. What was going on emotionally?
Well, or it's like watching a foreign film.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth just texted me and I got distracted. You could just tell the whole group, but that's fine.
No, because it's going to be our secret.
Okay, all right. What was I just saying? I was in the middle of saying something to Doug.
Visuals
Oh, we
first.
covered the visuals and a foreign film, watching a foreign film.
Oh,
without,
well, right. I mean, I speak some French, but not fluently. And when I'm watching a French film, I have no idea what they're saying. But I don't typically like watching it with the subtitles on, because I get it. You know, when someone's face looks like this, I know what that means. You know, I don't. And sometimes I actually have been told that that's a really great way to learn a language, is to, but to watch the French film with French subtitles, so you can associate the emotion and the sound of the word, but then see it written. You know, anyway, if you want to learn a language, that might be a fun thing for you to do. Okay, here's another fun one. It's from the chapter called How to Read a Screenplay. I never read other people's screenplays unless I understand how to read them, by what perspective to read them. It's a waste of time otherwise. A lot of people read screenplays left and right, but have they ever stopped to think about from what perspective they're reading it? When was the last time you read a screenplay you didn't write? How did you read it? No, not at bedtime or with the lights on. I mean, from what perspective did you read it? Were you looking at it through the gaze of a producer, or a writer, or an actor, or a director, or a composer? Recently, a filmmaker sent me the first 10 pages of a script, and I asked, can you tell me, or he asked, can you tell me if you think this has potential? I thought, well, it's impossible to measure the value of a screenplay in the first 10 pages. I might be able to get a sense of the writer's style, their use of vocabulary, whether their dialogue is lyrical or stilted, or even an example of the tone and atmosphere of the story. But feature screenplays are usually around 90 to 100 pages. Judging a screenplay in the first 10 pages is a bit like licking the outside of an apple to determine the taste without biting into it. And people who have tried both Granny Smith and Gala apples can tell you that neither tastes like a Fuji, so licking it just won't cut it. I answered the filmmaker, before I read it, tell me what is the perspective I'm reading it from? A director's perspective, a writer's point of view, or a consultant's? The filmmaker replied, great question. Read it first as a director. To clarify further, I asked another question. As if I were directing? Which would mean I would only see if the story was something that spoke to me personally as an artist and judge the story based on that alone. Or do you want me to read it from the perspective of you directing? Which means that I would not read it from my perspective, but rather project an outward external view and imagine this filmmaker's personality and how he sees the world. And does this story seem to align with his sensibilities? Or am I supposed to read it from the standpoint of Ron Howard directing, which means I'd be thinking about it from a totally different place? Would Ron Howard's sensibilities help this story appeal to a broad audience? And would studios find this story appealing financially? The filmmaker answered in a tongue-in-cheek manner, which ended the discussion, but I was totally serious. I decided to not read the 10 pages he sent me. Even if he had sent me the completed screenplay, I wouldn't have read it without understanding from which perspective to read it. If everyone practiced this way of thinking and consciously reading, it would change the industry. It's impossible to adequately judge a movie's potential by the screenplay alone. Screenplays aren't novels, and what's on paper doesn't always translate visually. Film is the director's medium. To judge a movie, one must always take into consideration the visual elements: costumes, hairstyles, makeup, art direction, production design, props, camera work, colors, rhythm, performers, and their acting abilities, and especially the music and score. I'm going to skip ahead. Or I could just tell you what I was trying to skip ahead to find. Had anybody really ever thought about that before? Like, when you're given a script from someone to read, when you're reading it as an actor, do you typically, let me ask you this, Doug or Steven, is your primary focus internally processing it coming from the place of, if I were in this movie?
Yeah. As the actor, yes. I'm looking at for me, if I'm reading a script, I'm looking at the part with me acting in it and how I interpret the character and see it and visualize the whole thing. Not, which I thought was fascinating, you saying, is that to look at it from a director's standpoint, if you were saying, oh, if I was directing this, how do I visualize it, or how do I, which is a totally different way of looking at a script, at least it seems to me.
Well, I'm wondering also, when you are given scripts, it's usually always about, will you be in this?
Right.
I mean, very rarely have you ever been given one that they weren't interested in you being in?
No, that's true. But again, I also want to see what I can bring to the part as the actor. So I'm looking at it strictly from an actor standpoint. I'm not thinking about how they're going to shoot it, how they're going to light it, what the costume. None of that comes into my thought process. It's, for me, it's all about what I can bring to help achieve what the director and the producer, what they want.
What about the rest of you? When you're reading a screenplay that's been published or someone else's, are you aware of how you've usually read them?
For me, similar to Doug, if it's like a script that someone is giving me because they're interested in me being involved, perhaps, obviously I take it from that perspective. But otherwise, I generally try it as broadly as I can. I've never thought about putting it from this lens that you just told us, which makes more sense. But even as an actor, I try to read it as broadly as I can for like script analysis without getting too much into the character, just to understand the script first, is my approach anyway. But
Thank you for bringing that up, because I have a chapter in here that discusses this somewhere in it. I don't remember which chapter it is. It's one of those that I was reading from, because I only have 3 or 4 screenwriting ones. Because the structure and the floor plan is so important, I'm talking to Stephen, because the structure is so important, it just feels so weird. What I hate, the worst thing in the world, is spending 3 hours reading the screenplay and you get to the end to find out there was no structure.
Yeah.
So what I typically like doing is saying, send me the beat sheet, send me the Cliff's Notes synopsis version. You know, I want to know who done it. I want to everything revealed. Just send me the 2 or 3 page treatment that is totally specific and detailed, because then I can see if there's a structure. I mean, another thing to remember is that form and structure, formula, the way that movies and stories are presented, there is no right or wrong. You know, there's traditional, act 1, act 2, act 3. There's typically the hero's journey works. You know, that's why people reuse it, because it works psychologically and emotionally. But there are also stories like Memento, which happen backwards, that break traditional rules of form and function, and it becomes something else entirely. You know, there are ways where you can play around in a really fun, creative way with form itself and this skeleton, whatever it is, that could be radical, may not be new, could be, you know, if you look hard enough, you will find, you know, in classic literature and cinema and any place else, movies that were exactly like Memento that happened backwards, but they're probably very long ago, or they're very small, or there was a project that nobody saw, or, you know, whatever. Every form has been captured already. The only trick is, how do you make your form, your version of that form, unique to you? So this ashtray and this candle holder have the same form. They have, in fact, they're made both out of glass. They're both round. They're almost the same size. They have 2 totally different functions, although you could use them for both the same. You could use either one for either purpose. But if you're experiencing this and you go away and then next year you experience that, well, they look totally different. Same with, you know, a cup or a dish. You know, it's the same form. It's just they have different purposes, even though you could use them for both. I mean, you know, you could drink your water out of a big bowl, but it'd be a little silly. You just drink it out of a glass. But whatever you want, you know, if you would prefer the bowl, have the bowl. But the same goes with stories and movies and media and any kind of storytelling. You know, the classic tales and fables and stories have been told and retold so many times in other different ways that you'd never know they were the same movie. You know, like in the Save the Cat books, the guy compares, is it Jaws and Alien? You know, it's basically the same movie. It's just one's in space and one's on land, you know? There's a dozen of those. Hundreds. There are hundreds of examples that we don't need to get into totally today. But if anybody has one that's on the front of their mind that I haven't mentioned,
like
say
Point
so.
Break and Fast and Furious, that kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once you start thinking about that, then the pressure of your story isn't such a burden anymore. You know, it becomes something that, like, if you sit down and tell yourself the story, I'm going to write an original story that nobody's ever heard. Even if you thought that was the case, when you get done, and if you send it to me, I will find the list of movies that were exactly the same to send back to you, you know, so that you could then watch those for your research before you direct it or before you make it. In fact, there used to be, Doug, are you from LA?
No, I'm an Army brat, so.
All right, well, when I was doing my first film, it was 97. I had just left CalArts, or I was thinking about writing it while I was still at CalArts, or maybe I had already left. My mentor at CalArts, who then became my consultant when we were making that movie, knew of this crazy video store on like Melrose, somewhere deep on Melrose. And it was in a strip mall in the corner. It wasn't fancy by any means. And in fact, it was quite narrow inside, and it smelled kind of bad, and there weren't even that many windows, and it was really...
Idiots?
Which one?
Vidiots? Was it Vidiots? Videoits? Vidiots was a big one that had obscure movies that you just couldn't find anywhere else. There were a couple of them. There was that one. There was one other one.
That name doesn't ring a bell, but that's not saying it wasn't.
Right.
I don't remember. But here's what you could do. So the guy who worked there was like Yoda, okay? And you'd go in, and people all over the industry would do this. Like, that's why I was taken there, was you go and you tell the guy the story of your movie. And he says, and then he's like, you know, and he goes away, and he comes back with, you know, 3 or 4 movies for you to just take home and watch.
Wow.
And then you'd go home, and surprisingly enough, you know exactly why he's picked these. Because either there are sequences or themes or something. And I thought that was just such a cool thing, and I wish that still existed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are a couple of websites that I inadvertently found. I think they're meant to be, well, if you liked this, you'll also like these.
Right.
You know, and so they would say movies like Serial Mom is what I looked up. And there were some that were, you know, Heathers. There were some other movies that were similar, but there were also movies on that list that had nothing to do with Serial Mom. It was like, okay, well, Kathleen Turner's in Serial Mom, but that doesn't mean I'm going to like this movie that she's in. You know, like these two are totally different movies. But there are some of those sites that are out there where you can find, you know, like movies like whatever you're working on, you know, that's similar. And then you'll get a list of other movies that exist. And what I often do, even if it's not the same genre or the same style, I still like to study those structures, because the structure of, well, for instance, I don't know if I have my list here. Okay, so I'm the project that Elizabeth and I are working on. Clueless, Very Bad Things from 1998, Married to the Mob, Manhattan Murder Mystery, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the more recent De Niro, Pfeiffer movie, The Family, all came up as similar titles. And when I was watching these, I thought, well, I can see why they would put this on the list, but that's not our movie at all. But I'm still going to study the structure of Married to the Mob, because I might see a rhythm that is the same structure in Clueless. Now, even if what we're doing is not some silly, you know, teen comedy, Clueless doesn't fit either. But there are, maybe there's a rhythm or some bullet points that do match together. And so typically, anytime I'm sitting down and I'm gonna make a movie that I'm writing, which I've only written about half of my films, and even in some of those cases, I co-wrote them. I think I only personally just full-on wrote 2 of my 17 movies. The others were somebody else wrote them. But I start with formula and the structure of other people's movies first, because those already exist. And you don't have to do current ones. You could do, ones from the 30s. If you're gonna, my advice though, if you do like study like an old Hitchcock film or, an old Bergman, is to consider that the time watching them has changed, the people's attention to, well, their attention span. So, whereas you could you could sit around for an hour watching, Cary Grant walking around before anything happens, and finally some exciting things happening. Now you really have to do that in the first 10 minutes. I don't know if anybody would really feel suspenseful in the same way that they did in the 50s and 60s today. But maybe you want to do that on purpose. I mean, the other thing about creating a screenplay or a story or anything that's interesting is to do what no one else is doing. And if everyone else is writing, violent action things, and you do a horror comedy, it will stand out because no one else is doing that. Now, that's just a general broad thing, because even if you say that, well, there are thousands of horror comedies being made every year. So to stand out from those, you got to take that genre and then do something totally different than what everybody else in that genre is doing. And that's just I instinctively go there as a business person because I want to sell my movie. I want to make it, and then I want to license it places so that I can sustain a career and then make another one. But maybe you want to do something just for art's sake, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's like the film I directed in the fall that we're in post on stars Xander Berkeley and Sarah Clark and Mink Stoll, and it's got a good enough cast that I feel like we're going to license it, no problem. But I was more interested in the story and the way it looked, more so than whether or not it was commercial. Although that's yin and yang at that point, because it's like I can see that had I cast no names in it, I still have an audience as a director, but I'd have a lesser one than had I cast people that were recognizable faces. But that isn't always the case. We're going to talk about this in another week about having name actors in your movie. You don't need them. My first film sold globally without a single name actor in it. So it's not always the case that you need one. Going back to screenwriting, the other thing that I encourage people to sometimes do, which is tricky, is to get away. The writing of a screenplay in the traditional sense can bring a burden in a lot of ways. Like, I have to have the formatting right. I have to have it in final draft. It can't be Word. Typos, all these things that are a pressure on a lot of first timers. Because they do just want to do a good job. I don't think anybody ever wants to do a half-assed job. I think people genuinely want to do a good job. So when they're writing their script, they worry about a lot of things that they can worry about if they choose to, but they don't need to. And so I always say, it's like, just make the choice to not worry and to just allow yourself to do it your way. I mean, when Sofia Coppola directed the name always escapes me. I've talked about it 4 times this week and it's still escaping me. Lost in Translation, which is ironic. They had a 40-page outline, and it was a sort of a beat sheet, a treatment beat sheet for the entire film, but they never had a script. And now she's Sofia Coppola making a movie with Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, so they were able to find the funding even if they didn't have a lot. They had enough to go and shoot in Japan. I'll just tell you that they had plenty. But there was no script in the traditional sense. And in that case, it was primarily improv. And not full on, let's just wing it. Let's just make it up as we go along. You know, she had the beats, because after I had made a movie like this before I realized, or I was in the process of making that movie, and a mutual friend of Bill Murray's was in that film, and I learned that that is how they made their film too. So we had, you know, some dialogue. You know, if I knew that there was this moment, I wrote that out. But otherwise, it was just a beat, you know, sort of a outline. And each scene starts at A and ends at C. And as long as we get to C, then the rest of the story makes sense. But B really could be anything. You know, if this is A and it's been secured, and this is C and it's secure, then B can be anything. And sometimes, even if you've written it in a screenplay form and we're doing the scene, I ask the actor to try one for fun, make it up, do whatever you want, just get to C. You know, just try something totally off the wall, because there might be some instincts to do certain things that are better than what you've originally anticipated. Or they might be worse, it doesn't matter. But you can decide later. You know, now you're not burning the cost of celluloid. So you can shoot it a few takes, you know, on HD, and it's not going to cost you much. And you're already set up for it anyway. You know, so then you take that segment and you push it to the side, and then you've got C and E. And those are set points. You know that that's part of the structure that has to be there. It has to be. You have to have E in order to make the rest of the story happen. But D could be anything. So as you're going into the scene, you can play around with a little bit of blue, a little bit of red, a little bit of green, and see which one works the best on how to get to E. And then you push it over there, and then you have G. And G is set into stone, and F is fun and games. And on and on and on for the rest of your movie. Once you've created a project like that, it really changes the way you approach writing a screenplay. And if we back up, if we, you know, push all that away and ask ourselves, each project has a separate goal. Find out what your goal is. Because let's say you're writing a screenplay that the goal is to sell it. The goal is to option it to another director, or the hope is to send it to a production company and that they'll make it. You know, those are different options and those would inform how you go about the process of making your screenplay. If it's going to be an internal project that you're going to star in and that a friend of yours is going to direct, or you hope to package it on your own and appeal to this financier or this director or production company over here, then those things shift the way you approach making your screenplay. If I'm going to produce and direct something on my own, and I know exactly what I'm trying to communicate, I don't really worry too much about what's in the script, because I don't need to prove it to myself. Now, for the sake of all actors out there, sometimes this is confusing a little bit to them, because it's like they don't quite get the thing. You know, I mean, Sarah and Xander, when we were working in the fall, are fantastic in this movie. But I guarantee you, when they see the film, they will have had no idea that they were even in that movie. You know, it's like, I mean, they're in it. They're really in it. I don't mean it that way. I mean it like they're gonna watch it and be like, is that real? I see myself? I don't remember that. You know, it's like one of those kind of moments. Or maybe you have had I have a couple of, well, I don't want to give anything away, but I'm going to have to if I say what movie it was. I'll just say there was a really terrible movie made once. And a couple of the actors that were in it really thought they were going to get Oscar nominations. And it's just terrible. And I'm like, you thought that? Like, no. Like, it's really bad. In a way, it's like the Waiting for Guffman movie, only it happened. This really did happen. And I love the movie because I see it as hysterical, but it wasn't meant to be, which is interesting. Or so I was told. Okay, I have rambled on and on and on. I hope I have helped a few things, help you guys a little bit with just how to think about screenwriting and screenplays, which the psychology behind writing a screenplay and the process of it, I think is half the battle. I think that, you know, whether or not it's in the right format and what software you're using and whether your beat sheet is on cue or not, I think those are all practice makes perfect, and none of them are rules per se, because you can break it. You can have a form on your own. You make your own rules. But I hope just thinking about a few of these sort of different ways of approaching a screenplay have helped. I mean, I say more in the book, but for today, I thought that was enough. Does anybody have any specific questions or comments about anything that I've talked about that maybe I didn't finish? I feel like sometimes I get excited and passionate and then I forget what I was saying.
I have a question. This is just
Yes.
goes to the very beginning. It's just for some reason I get when you're talking about the 5 minutes and 5 minutes and the 30-minute. So do you just if you want a 30-minute show and then you know that normally it's only going to be really about 10 minutes
Like,
less than that.
Yeah.
So then you just when you put all this stuff together and then you shoot it and you edit it down to 10 minutes less than that. Is that what happens? Just when you start thinking of how long?
No, I think it's two things I want to say. First is I think this really matters in the sense of feature filmmaking.
Oh.
If you're going to do a short, or you're going to have like an episodic TV show at like 30 minutes long, or they're about like 22.
Then it doesn't matter.
Well, then it's a little different because the structure and the formula for those kinds of shows are different because it's a different canvas.
Oh.
Now, I would still follow the every 5 minute when you're making your outline as a general rule. And now it's not going to actually be exactly 5 minutes. But if you wrote 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, you know, give yourself a little buffer because you might edit it down or something. That's not a lot of time to communicate, unless if it's a short film where it's just one topic, one moment, you know, just slice of life, just that one thing. Then I think that when you start filling it in, you might feel like there's a lot to fill in there, but when you're writing it, I mean, go watch like a 30-minute show on Netflix or something and write down every 3 to 5 minutes, pause, and just write down a generalized what has happened so far. And then watch the next 3 to 5 minutes, write down what's happened. Next 3 to 5 minutes, pause, write down. In some cases, you'll find that all of what you've done so far and you're 10 minutes in, you're still in the same scene. You know, it's like you haven't even left the table. It's still these two people talking, you know? But it's just an exercise to get your mind wrapping around and being familiar with how long it takes to watch something.
Okay, and that makes sense. If you're going to just do something smaller, then you don't really need to follow those formats. And I thought the most interesting thing was when you're dealing with people with smaller things like shorts or something like that, you're right, because you've got limited budgets and limited props and limited scenery. It really comes down to what you think you can put together in terms of entertainment within your capacity. So there's no sense in killing yourself over a script if you really can't fulfill it, you know, in terms of, you know, those visuals that you need, or the lighting, whatever. You just kind of have to balance it together so it comes together in an artistic whole that hopefully amuses somebody. So and it may not be by having that perfect script that you held on to, because you may not get that moment from your actors.
Well, right. Or you could be working with really, really terrific actors that, I mean, if you were to do, you know, a short project and it was a woman at her, she'd just given birth, and she's waiting to get the baby, like they're cleaning it off, right? And for that 10 minutes, you as a viewer might be riveted with what she's feeling and being and doing, and the shot might be just of her head on the pillow. It might not have anything else in the whole room. And at first, when it starts out, you may not even know that she just gave birth. You know, it's like it might just be right into the moment, and it's just that one moment, and then, you know, here comes the baby, and then here comes this, and then there's this moment, and then it's over. That doesn't take much to create little scenarios like that, but that could be very moving, could be very inspiring, don't cost a lot of money. And sometimes if the acting is tremendous, they don't even have to look that good. I mean, it's interesting. Or if the sound is perfect and it's really riveting, the audience forgives a lesser image.
Right.
There was a movie that David Lynch made called Inland Empire, which was shot on mini DV. And he just did this a few years ago. So it was, you know, quite long after the mini DV was what you would shoot on. And it physically looks very inky and bad, quite frankly, but on purpose. Mm-hmm. But all the money was spent in, it sounds perfect. You know, so it's like if you were actually shooting on your mini DV camera, that sound is no good. But if you've got your boom and your, you know, your sound guy on the mix and all that, then you can make a really great sound. But if it's flipped, if you have the perfect image and it doesn't sound very good, then you've lost your audience because they just can't forgive that somehow. I don't know why, but I think it's just the way that the mind processes it.
Yeah.
But there's a ton of ways to make a short riveting. And in those cases, I would say pay more attention to the dialogue in what you're writing down for a shorter project, and less about what else is happening. Unless it's about what's happening. I mean, if like, what's the focus? Is the focus, you know, what is being said out of this person, or is it the situation? But again, if it's a short project, the only reason a screenplay exists is so that people know where to go and what to do. It's just an organizational tool. And if you want to make that handwritten on a piece of paper that you're going to Xerox and pass out to everybody, that works too. It's just to provide, it's an organizational tool for other people on the set. And if you communicate it with your DP, what you want it to look like, you know, and your actors how to perform it and whatever, then it doesn't matter what it physically looks like, because no one will ever see it when they're watching the movie.
Gosh, interesting. Okay.
Like when you watch a movie, you don't know if that screenplay was, I mean, you assume it was typed in a screenplay format, but may not have been.
Well, I mean, I saw Married to the Mob, and I assume everything was typed out. Those things are so specific.
I am pretty sure that was typed out also. Does anybody else have anything for today? Stephen, did I help you at all?
Yeah. No, I mean, I enjoy your approach of almost like demystifying it. Like the first draft is just the first step, or like, don't burden yourself with doing something unique. Like you're not, you know, I don't know, just like you're very practical in your approach, which I appreciate.
Thank you. Glad it helped.
Stephen, I have a question. Have you
Yes.
ever looked at a film and go, I like the structure, I'll use the structure, but make it my story?
Yes. And you know, when I was told recently, there was a movie I was told to watch based on the project that Elizabeth and I are working on.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they told me the premise, I had an idea in my head about what that would be. And I immediately wrote that down. Someone is joining us an hour late. I immediately wrote that down, and then I watched the movie. Because sometimes when I get finished with the movie, I'm like, oh God, my idea was so much better. But then I have forgotten my idea. Right? So I typically always try to write it down before watching it. And maybe it's not better, it's just different. But I always go back to the way that I thought of it, because that's more true to my being.
Right.
It's going to be easier for me to write and create that because it came to me that way. And if I go try to do this other thing, maybe that's not going to be as effortless.
Okay. Yeah. Because it's almost like the whole thing of if you take a bad movie and go, okay, I like the idea of a bad movie, and I'm going to make it my movie, but there's a book in there that works or whatever. I've seen that happen where I go, this reminds me of such a, and one case in particular, I remember asking the writer, and I said, this reminds me, and they go, it's interesting. I like the beginning of that movie. It was a bad movie, but I thought I can use that and go my direction. And I thought that's fascinating. Yeah,
that's great. I love stuff like that.
Yeah,
I really do. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, in some cases, or I'll like the idea of a plot point that happens, let's say 2/3 into it. And the only reason that I liked that plot point was because of I'm just going to say like the gestalt process. You know, it's like all those steps leading up to that moment I liked made that moment I liked. So then I've got to be like, it's even a little bit tougher because I can't just borrow that moment without studying the steps that got to that moment. Now, those steps can be anything, but the ones that were there and chosen by that project had this impact on me. And so if I model is the word I use. I don't like using the word copy because it's not a copy. It's just, you're modeling it. If I model that, I might find that that is the only way to reach that goal. Now, probably the case is that you can have 100 different approaches and still get to that same place. And the results might be different a little bit each time. It's like if you want to make somebody cry in a movie, the first thing you do as an actor, right, is to try to not cry.
Right.
You know, but you can't just give that person a moment to cause the viewer to cry, or maybe you're supposed to cry. Maybe you're weeping uncontrollably in this scene. But if you haven't given this person a character that people care for, nobody cares. Or the crying is just a thing. It's like they don't feel for that person. You know, I mean, if you opened a movie See, now I'm starting to, every time I say something like that, I challenge myself and I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I should open a movie with a person who is uncontrollably sobbing and you don't know who they are, what they're talking about. They're incoherently a mess because they're just so messed up. I wonder how many minutes it will take before I feel total compassion for this person. And I wonder what tools would I have to use? Like, let's say if it's a terrible thing, because now I'm having flashbacks of that Jodie Foster movie, one of her first ones that she did, which was terrible. I mean, it was great. It was great. It was just, I mean, it was awful what happened to her in that movie. But if you like take, like, you're in the back of this bar and a woman is pushed out the back door, and that's the shot number one, first second, and she is sobbing uncontrollably, you already have a picture in your mind of what could have possibly just happened. Even if you are wrong and that's not what happened, and the scene goes on and you find out it was for something else, there are things like that that I think, again, I mean, this gets a little bit more about the mind. It's like, what is our experience as a film viewer, film writer, a person in the world? What does that image immediately communicate to me? I'm just going to read this one little thing, and then it's just a sentence or two. And then I'm going to call it a day because we've been talking for a long time. Okay. Oh, I just passed it. Roberto Rossellini, the director and Isabella's father, once said, "Do you know how many words it takes to adequately explain an image that will register in your mind the total meaning in a split second?" I get what he's saying. I also cannot wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
It's like words and images are totally different things, but words give you images. So when I say apple, you can see an apple.
Mm-hmm.
If I say a blue tree, you can picture a blue tree, even though they typically don't exist. You know, or a flying pig. You can see it. It's not happening in real life, but you can imagine it. You know, it's like the imagination. And we're creative people here today. But, you know, sometimes executives or the people, you know, with the keys to the bank don't have an imagination at all. And in that case, I don't think whether you have spent hours and hours and hours and weeks and months writing the perfect sentence in your script, I don't think they'd have a picture in their mind anyway. And how would they know whether the script was good or bad? Yeah. Most often, no one ever reads them entirely. Two things I'll tell you before we go. Doug, did you know that I don't think the producers of our project that we did for Mark Cuban's channel or the network ever saw the script? I think
I can believe that because they were so excited that you were ahead of schedule. That's all they cared about.
Right. And what I think, that movie was purchased and sold and acquired from a beat sheet or a treatment.
Wow.
It was an 8-page treatment that covered everything. I mean, it really did cover everything. I think that you can also film a movie like that just based on the treatment. It's a very specific paragraph. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know exactly what's going on. Sometimes there's lines of dialogue in it. Another way a screenplay is useful is when it comes to scheduling, because typically movies are shot out of order based on location or talent availability. But yeah, I think it's funny that, I mean, it makes a bit of sense if you don't have time to read every screenplay that comes across your desk. So if you're an executive and you're greenlighting all these things, really you have time for about 8 pages, and whether or not that works for you or not.
I know a writer, and he was given he and his partner were given the money person said, I'm interested in chess, sci-fi, and I can't remember what the third, three things. And that's what they wrote. They got the funding and they wrote that movie. And aliens. He liked aliens. Those were the three. So it had to be sci-fi, alien-esque, and he liked chess. So chess had to literally play in some way. And that was all they had to go on. And they were able, yeah.
Interesting.
He said, I'll fund this movie if those things are there. And that's what they wrote. And it was like, I mean, it's just fascinating. That was the selling pitch. So yeah, it was kind of like the director said, I have this guy who has the money. This is what I need. And that's what they wrote for him. And the guys were telling me, they said, yeah, that was all we had to go on. Nothing more.
That's exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you could have a dozen different movies based on that alone.
And that's what I thought was cool. Is like, so this guy, and he said, yeah, the director said, I've got the money, this guy, but these are his requirements. And they wrote it and they shot it, and it was a trip. That they actually pulled it off.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that. I love that, actually.
So I wish more would say, okay, these are the things I want, and if you work those in, no matter how you do it.
I like horses.
Yeah.
I like traveling to some place that doesn't have horses, and then something else. You know, you're just like, oh, but to try to figure out how to make that into a story.
Right.
It's cool. When you were saying it, I started trying to find my story. Like, what would I tell with that combination? It's pretty cool. Okay, I forget which other thing I was going to say about screenplays in general. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're useful. They're totally unnecessary. And they're great to have. It helps with scheduling. You don't really need them. But it all just depends on what it is you're doing. If it's something that really is complex, they're really useful because it's a way to keep it organized. If you're really free and it's an improv based, if it's something that you're creating on the fly, you don't really need them. But you do need actors who are good at improv and who might have had a history with writing. Because if you're planning to do an entire movie, basically improv, which I did for my film El Gonzo, which turned out great. Both of those actors were brilliant at improv and also had written things before. So I lucked out because that worked for me, but you could pick the wrong actor and it could be dreadful. So just be careful if you're going to do a project like that.
You know, yeah. Steve, I'm trying to wrap my head around the discussion that we're having today because I just started doing script writing analysis. You know, I'm one of those script readers, just a couple of them. And I'll spend like 3 weeks. They want you to read everything. I'll spend 3 weeks reading through it and doing all this detailed analysis. And now I'm listening to you guys saying, hey, yeah.
Well,
I'm really trying to I don't know. It's like two different worlds. I'm really I'm thinking, and I don't really want to spend all that time either, 3 weeks on these, mostly the scripts that kind of go off here,
Well, what you're doing, though, is you're providing a service for somebody who actually wants that. And that's what's different. So, for instance, if I have written a script and I don't know any of what we've talked about today, all I know is sort of what should be traditional. And there is a what should be traditional. There is a defined package of what is a traditional screenplay. And what I'm talking about today is there's also all these other ways.
Right.
But I'm not saying that the traditional way is bad. And in fact, I'm saying there is a traditional way. And if I have written a screenplay in a traditional way, and my hope is to option it or sell it to a production company for however much money, then it better be traditional. If my proposed buyer expects a traditional screenplay, it better be traditional. If I hand them a handwritten bullet point, they're going to be like, what? You know? So because the buyer is expecting a traditional screenplay. Now, if the buyer is expecting a handwritten note and I hand him a traditional screenplay, he doesn't know what that is. So but typically the person expects a traditional screenplay. And if that's the case, then you do send off your script to sometimes companies or individuals or breakdown services, you know, groups and companies and gatherings and whatever. And you hire them to break apart your script in the traditional manner. And you're looking as the reader, aren't you looking for like structure and then also sort of character points and maybe think about this? Yeah, storyline.
Looking for a story.
Yeah.
But yours is more so for people that just want to get the indie or the movie done, and they've got their own resources and they got to use what they have, and that's how they're going to create it. And I love that.
Well, I'm saying that that's okay. I'm saying that if all you've got is a notebook and a ballpoint pen, and that's all you got, that's okay. If all you have is a laptop with a Word on it and you can't afford final draft, that's okay. You don't have to worry about doing it the way they tell you to do it. All you have, but just use your resources. Typically, everybody can get a screenwriting software, and now there are free ones. So, you know, some of those, I'm just reframing it in a way that, I mean, when I write a script, they look just like scripts. They look traditional. They may not always be traditional in the sense that, you know, but even if my script is 45 pages and most of it's just a beat sheet or an outline, it's still, I do it in final draft. So it looks exactly like a script. It's just smaller.
The fact is, many people who don't follow the traditional method can get their movie made and they can sell it. So I need to ease off on these. When I'm doing this analysis, I just need to ease out because you don't know who's going to get those.
Yeah, but not necessarily, because I think that's valuable. And if you're just starting out and you don't know story well enough, and then you get feedback from somebody like you who has said, have you ever thought about whatever it is? That actually could be really, really helpful to that person. You know, or if you say, I didn't buy this at all. You know, I'm just like, I did not buy this. I didn't think this was funny. I didn't think, you know, even if you say that, that's okay, because your perspective is what that is. And that is going to be useful to the person who receives it, because they're going to learn over time that not everybody likes everything they do, which we'll talk about in another day. But no, I think what you do is pretty great. And in fact, one time I almost, when I was at college, had one of those jobs, and they didn't ask me back because when I was sent the script, and then I thought it might have been a test, because on page 1, the protagonist loses a couple of limbs, and it wasn't a horror film. I was just like, well, I don't want to watch a movie with a person without these limbs. It just sounds dreadful. It sounds like it's a depressing movie. And I just wrote, this will never fly. No one will ever watch this movie. And that was what I sent back. And then I don't know. But then I thought, what was the Born on the 4th of July?
Yeah.
What if it was like a classic movie that they've sent to me to test me on my like response to it? And that was my response. And then they just never called me back. But anyway, I'm a miserable reader, so that would have been a terrible job. But anyway, so Filmmaking Confidential is available anywhere books are sold and on Audible. If you liked the way that I was reading it, I narrate the audiobook, and in the moments that are funny, you can really tell they're funny because I'm funny during them.
No, they're funny reading too.
Okay, well, yeah, that's true. It is too. But anyway, if you guys, anybody who gets this and posts it online and tags me, I will send them a HD download of either Firecracker or Pep Squad, because I mentioned Pep Squad in the book so much that I feel like I need to offer that as a thing for people too. every week I'm going to start doing these talks, and each week is going to be a different topic.
Is it okay if we invite people to this? Because I've wanted to invite people, but I didn't know how you felt about that. Is it all right to reach out?
This is open to the public.
Okay.
The other thing I want to say is the only reason it appears that it's not that way is because when you, on the meetup group, when you put it that it's an online link, you put the link there, but it doesn't automatically show. It only shows for people who have RSVP'd. But if you RSVP and get that link and send it to 10 people, that's fine.
Okay.
It's just for whatever reason, it's not made visible.
Well, that's why I wasn't sure of, and I didn't want to do that and start saying, hey, check, without making sure it was something that people could join.
Oh yeah, anybody can bring anybody. That'd be great. The more the merrier. So I can't get up and go look at what the next one is. I can't remember what the next one is. I posted like one every week for like the next 8 to 10 weeks. And they're all really interesting topics. They're all really exciting.
Fight scene, they're one. I know that's coming up.
Sex and violence.
And violence, yeah, that's coming.
I think maybe the next one is directing secrets.
Directing, yes.
And what I'm going to do is, some of these things were secret, I guess. I mean, I don't know. The way that I go about like numbering or like strategizing a screenplay. I mean, sometimes the form, it's just like, just take the form, just take it, just borrow that model over there. Directing secrets are fun because, well, I'll wait till we're there to talk about it. But some of these are actually like, there's some mind-blowing things that when I either learned about them, I was told about them, or it occurred to me. It was a little bit like, those shower curtain rods that like curve out away from, why did it take the human race this long to invent that? It's like, once you see it, you're like, why has this just now been a thing? I mean, we've been showering for a really long time. Why have we never thought of this before? It's like at the beginning of the book, when I'm talking about my plumber. So I put in my shower, I'm 6'5". So I had my shower head raised on the wall so that it would pour on me here. But it was really close to the ceiling, quite frankly, where it was coming out of the wall. And the plumber was like, well, nobody puts them that high. And I'm like, well, this is where I want it. And then it occurs to me, he's my height. Oh. And I'm like, has he really gone through his whole life with the shower head like down here and like never feeling that the shower here thing? And I'm like, wow. But yeah, so sometimes there are moments when I genuinely come up with something that I'm like, well, yeah, isn't that a thing? And nobody knows anything about it. And I'm like, no, really? So I put them in the book, all of them. And we'll talk about them in future.
And Directing Secrets is September the 24th.
Okay, great.
That's what you got. I was just looking it up for you.
Great. Excellent. Well, I hope to see you guys there then. And anytime you have a question, meanwhile, in between these, stevebalderson.com has a contact place where you can just email me. I think I'll get direct emails if you email me on Meetup also, but you could just email me directly off of Meetup. Dekenga.com or stevebalderson.com. And I will happily answer any questions or provide advice, and I should be looking into the camera. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start putting a little circle over here just to remind myself to talk over here when I'm talking to someone. All right. I thank you guys very much for today. Somebody looked like Jay came an hour late, but luckily they were here for the ending.
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no problem. It was so funny because we were just wrapping up and I was just going to end it. And then I was like, oh, wait, we've got somebody else.
I have a question.
Yes.
So so one of you and the other guy was talking about a movie with chess and the aliens and the something else. What was the movie called?
Oh yeah, I don't know. Do you know, Doug?
Atlantis Down. That was at least that was the final title they told me. So I don't know if it's changed since then, but that's what it was at that time. And it was an Italian director, so.
Cool. I'm sure if you Google it, it'll come up somewhere.
Is it mainstream?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. That was what it was at the time. This was years ago, probably a dozen years ago. So who even knows if it's out there anymore?
The other thing I'll tell you is that every one of these that I do, I have recorded it, and so I put it up on my website on the resources page. So if you go to stevebalderson.com and click learn and then resources, they're all there. So you can always go back and revisit them. And I've tried to organize them in a way that you can clearly see the cover and say, oh, I want to learn about cinematography. Then you can just go and find that one and watch that one. And I'm going to keep them up there and free forever, so that if you ever down the road, months from now, can't remember what we talked about on this, but you remember something, then you can come back and find it. I'm at some point also going to edit them auditorially. Auditorially. Isn't that funny? I'm so ironic today. And if I can find a really good transcriber that does it automatically, I might transcribe them so that you could scroll and, find words in the document easier than like scrolling visually through a video. But some of the transcribing websites that I've used when it's been AI isn't quite good enough yet. And I don't want to pay anybody to do it yet. So I'm waiting for the transcribing part. But all of these are there for you guys. And anytime you need anything, let me know. And I hope to see you all again very soon.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.